Hello my liege, I hope you're ready to hop up on your steed because today's Bumblebee video is all about the top 10 most unusual facts about the Crusades. First up is how land scurvy was a literal thing, which I know evokes more like a piratey imagery, turning into scurvy knaves from all the liquor, no Sunny D, but that's the hang-up. You see, severe vitamin C deficiency, which causes scurvy, has no borders. Ain't no mountain high enough, valley low enough, river wide enough type of energy, baby. And no, it's not an easy fix. It's not, oh, just eat some oranges, my guy, here's some Five Alive. You and your fancy people knowledge of citrus. You gotta remember these guys ate like medieval folks. So, as author Andrew Holt explains, Crusaders greatly emphasized meat consumption only. And medieval knights generally equated meat eating with strength. Still no dudes with that ideology, have fun with that bulk loss, bro, but how bad did land scurvy get? Well, it killed 1/6 of the French army during the 5th Crusade. Written descriptions detail the agony of these crusaders, such as the 1218 siege, when men seized with violent pain in the feet and ankles, their gums became swollen and their teeth loose and useless, while their hips and shin bones turned black and putrefied. The peaceful death that followed sounded more like a mercy than loss. Scurvy proved overwhelming during the 7th Crusade as well, reducing the troops of Louis VI to bouts of pained howling as barbers sliced large pieces of flesh from the men's swollen gums. Next one lets me break out just a terrible Godfather impression. Ready? Today, on the day of my daughter's wedding, I shouldn't have done it. Saladin, one of the most famous but most complicated figures of the crusading eras. A Kurdish leader, he was born around 1137 AD and was the first sultan of Syria and Egypt, fighting against the Christian Crusades. A skilled negotiator, manipulator, and brilliant mind, he was known for cruelty, but he could also be a noble and logical dude, and occasionally merciful and compassionate, as shown in the Siege of Kerak in 1183. While besieging the Crusaders' stronghold of Kerak 1183, Saladin reportedly ordered his army to avoid striking a particular area of the castle, because that is where future Queen Sibyella's younger half-sister Isabella was supposed to be having her wedding that night with her new husband. See, Crusade Queen Sibyella was famously married not to a European nobleman or a descendant of kings, but a landless, virtually unknown nincompoop guy Le Suigan, out of love, after a whole lot of public rejections and emotional BS and widowhood. But as hardcore as that story is, which trust me it is, I'm telling the one of her sister's equally wild wedding. So, as Saladin and his armies approach Kerak Castle, Baldwin III, big bro of the bride and of Sibyella, say, let's take a quick walk, bro, and reach to deal with Saladin. One sister had already been through enough, let's keep this peaceful, you know, day of my sister's wedding, whatever. The attack on the castle could continue as long as the chamber where the wedding was taking place would just be unharmed. Saladin actually agreed to this and respectfully only laid siege to every other area of the castle. Next up is the world's worst group project. Religion is a weapon sharper than any blade and has brought more blood than anyone ever could. What started as an archaic way for us to explain our existence has turned into an excuse to commit any atrocity in the name of someone who may not even be there at all. That's what faith is, isn't it? No absolution or surety, God's there protecting you, blessing you, seeing you. Rather simply having faith and belief that they are. When humans decided to have surety our gods were real and lost the whole point of faith, we began to truly use religion and the ideology of gods as a reason for war. Not all groups, however. Mongols were a great example, a religiously and ethnically diverse army. They were just cool with about anything as long as you don't get in the way of the empire. Some Mongols, both individually and in groups, adopted Christian practices, though it's not clear how much of the European political leaders knew about this. But they knew about Khan, at least in a Eurocentric interpretation of him, and that he could be a powerful ally to help knock down the Muslim powers that be. Perhaps even open the way for a new Christian Jerusalem again. Early 13th century, it must have been clear that the Christian Crusaders were steadily losing ground, thus they began to reach out to Genghis Khan, supposedly having sent written letters to the notorious leader who could easily be their key in religious persecution. Still, even the political tidal wave of the Mongol Empire wasn't bound to go on forever, and neither were the Muslim-led forces helpless. It all more or less came crashing down in 1260 when Mamluk Sultanate held back the Mongols in Palestine. The descendants of Genghis Khan could and would go no further, halting any bare hope of a Mongo-European alliance. Hey, another fun fact about the Christian Crusaders to tie into that, they peaked like high schoolers. rulers. So, the first Crusades of the 11th century were the most successful, at least from the European Christian perspective. Crusaders had captured the holy city of Jerusalem, for Christ's sake, and that's like 80% of what this whole war is about. But it's also hard to stop something as simultaneously impassioned and nebulous as a holy war once it gets rolling. Surely, some must have also questioned the human cost of all that war, with the many lives and combatants and innocent alike snuffed out in the name of raising a right sort of flag over Jerusalem and other cities, even their own emperors and kings. Example, while traveling 12th century Turkey in the Third Crusade, 67-year-old Emperor Frederick Barbarossa is said to have drowned. Some of his heartbroken followers attempted to preserve his body in vinegar for the trip back. Didn't work and they pickled him, called that pickled Anyways, there were many crusades after that first one to tune out about 8 different extended campaigns, in addition to various battles and other ill-considered ventures like the stupid children's crusades you've heard about in some of our videos. Ultimately, as Muslim forces like those of the Saracens and the Mamluks took back more and more of the region, it became clear that the first crusade was just the high point for Europeans. One thing they did that some of us still do is listen to the big sky rocks. Throughout history, astronomical phenomena like comets, meteors, and other heavenly objects moving in the sky have been interpreted as omens and portents. We forget that we have all the explanation we have now for what's going on up there, but they didn't. Dude, if the sun rose an hour later than usual, everyone thought it was Armageddon. Imagine that mindset, the level of terror and anxiety. Take the comet of 1517, which was witnessed over the land of the Aztec Mexica ruler Montezuma II, and inspired a sense of foreboding ahead of the looming Spanish conquest. Things weren't much different elsewhere. For the Christians and the Muslims of the Crusades, astronomical phenomena was always interpreted as good or bad omens, and most were unwilling to accept the signs in the sky as scientific phenomena only, even when empires like the Ottomans began to delve into astronomy. This is an example of how religion could mow down the paganism that was there before, but it was never truly lost in our conscience. Per Lumen learning, the 11th century members of the People's Crusade seemed especially primed to interpret meteors and comets as favorable omens. Some even went as far as to link sights in the sky with the end of the world, which could have been a tactic deployed by the church to keep everyone in line, as the church kinda likes to do. It certainly got tied into the first crusade when a meteor shower was spotted on April 3rd of 1095, and that pushed Pope Urban II to declare a holy war. Could have just been part of a motivation to score as many religious points for himself as possible before the apocalypse came, though. During the Crusades, one guy accepted a side quest: fight a bear. That absolute legend was Godfrey of Bouillon, who started the royal line of Jerusalem off with a bang, evidently. So naturally, given he lived in the 11th century and the way that medieval chroniclers like to play fast and loose with truth on occasion, it's no wonder that the real man is tied up in some wild stories. And we really do mean wild, like banging biddies, drugs, and rock and roll. Godfrey was a noble knight, crusader, and flighty intercourse fiend, and overall chill dude. He was out twiddling his thumbs on his horse, enjoying the weather, when he comes across some poor sad sap who's just trying to collect sticks getting mauled by a bear. Godfrey, sword at the ready, galloped in to help, but gets straight up yeeted from his own horse by the bear. He is at a hardcore disadvantage for a while, but all his Tin Man armor and strength worked in his favor, and some help from another knight passing by as well. With his own history of mud wrestling, Godfrey beat Winnie the Pooh off himself. Naturally, he was roughed up something awful, but homeboy lived and had 2 witnesses to the account, and the tale was recorded by Albert of Athens. Regardless, while some may be skeptical as to whether or not Godfrey actually went mano a mano with a bear, we do know he went on to rule Jerusalem for a single year, and his younger brother Baldwin later became the first king of Jerusalem. For some reason, during the Crusades, the Europeans made up an imaginary Rich BFF. The Christian crusade was desperate, wimpy lot since day one. They wanted a powerful foreign ally so bad, but every foreign would look at their crusade and their religion, suck their teeth, and go, I appreciate the offer, but the Crusades' desire for a powerful foreign ally was so strong, people just collectively invented one instead, like a superpowered imaginary friend on a geopolitical scale. Prester John, a rumored king who was not only incredibly rich and influential, but definitely wanted to help only the Christian cause. The basics of the myth is Prester John was both a physical king and a Christian holy man like a pope or an archbishop. His faraway lands, variously described as being in somewhere like Ethiopia or Japan, were full of wonders and riches, including vast gold deposits and a fountain of youth. Rumors of things they'd heard of greater empires having, and that's where everyone knew the greater empires were. If only history would remember it that way, but erasure. Some writings even claim that his kingdom had a garden of paradise, the original earth of which Adam and Eve were evicted from long ago. And if he could only make contact with the Crusaders, he would totally help them and take them back to the Holy Land in a heartbeat. But damn, he's just like he can't right now, he's on vacation. you know. Only no one ever found Prester John? Sure, there were plenty of letters and chronicles daring to outline his kingdom and way of life, but no one was able to say that he'd actually met the ruler. And as the centuries rolled on and Europeans began to visit Africa and Asia, it soon became clear Prester John was either very good at hiding or had never existed. Like Jack and the Beanstalk, these morons actually had a Holy Goose. It's safe to say that the most medieval Europeans who went on the crusade to the Holy Land did so at the urging of a powerful, sometimes even charismatic individual. Now whether that's a god or some lunatic king or a combo of a lunatic king saying he's a god, which is probably just the voice of the half-developed twin's brain sharing his skull caused by all the in-family relations. As religious intensity of the Crusades built, more and more people felt it was their Christian duty to free the region, or at least gawk at the fighting and maybe take part in some adventuring and plundering opportunities. Historic erasure, but make it fun. The growing tide of interested folks combined with the church making everyone feel special eventually produced some pretty weird leaders, like a goose. In 1096, People's Crusade was an unofficial one that wasn't technically sanctioned by the Pope, and that's what made a crusade by the way. Yet plenty of regular folks took part, and even some following a Holy Goose. In one version of the tale, a poor woman is trailed by one of her geese, and through a series of misinterpretations and misunderstandings, people began to believe that this was a divinely inspired goose leading them. Chroniclers jumped on the chance to make these guys look like historical idiots, and they were, but so was everyone of the Crusades, so joke's on you chroniclers, y'all are in the club too. Seriously, who tries to follow a goose to Jerusalem anyways? Especially since by most medieval understandings, animals didn't have a soul, so they couldn't understand the divine to begin with. How are you guys gonna follow it all the way there, give them a tip, and then say move along, you aren't allowed in? That's unfair. Now for the poor people of Christ who ate the other poor people, not of Christ, or sometimes of Christ. They didn't really care. Usually once that type of behavior starts up, either God is super involved like the Mexica Aztecs, or it is super not. As mentioned, there is ton of crusades you could go on back then. The purpose of crusades began to splinter over time, and quite a few people went for religious reasons, sure, perhaps wanting to wash away their sins in one great grand gesture. Others, it seems, were more in it to exercise their xenophobia and the possible financial gain from plundering foreign lands. And for many, those motivations got all mixed up and produced some very strange situations, like how the Tafurs were a group of crusaders who took strict vows of poverty to the point where they wore rough clothing, discarded all of their weapons, which were mostly rusty farm tools, and ate grass and roots to survive. The Tafurs also had a reputation for ruthless war making and plundering, to the point where over time they creeped out even other crusaders. Like, they could often be relied on to throw themselves wholeheartedly into battle, but they also devastate innocent people and settlements that they come across. Chroniclers often called the Tafurs depraved, and depraved is the best word for what they became notorious for doing. The reported acts of people eating during the siege of Antioch, where the chroniclers maintain that they were among the first to consume fallen comrades and enemies alike, and the only ones to do so without hesitation. One chronicler wrote that another siege produced hunger so terribly that the Crusaders were tormented by madness of starvation, and so resorted to consuming the remains of enemies that they had thrown into the swamp weeks before. That must have been the most effed up fishing trip imaginable. Soon enough, the creepy reputation of these particular Crusaders began to spread beyond the walls of Antioch when the Muslim commanders asked the Christian Crusade commanders to rein in the Tafurs, because obviously this crap is out of hand, super creepy, and it's not even about religion anymore. Yeah, no, the Christian Crusaders leaders had to awkwardly admit they couldn't actually control the Tafurs, and it was surely an unnerving realization to finally admit that some of the most fanatical elements under their supposed command were so wild and intense they weren't really under anyone's power but their own. Muslim commanders really could only give a metaphorical deadpan "seriously guys" expression when they heard that one. And last but not least, it's weaponized bees. Finding this has been one of the single most euphoric things I've ever experienced. Just a 10 out of 10 for comedy and serotonin. So get this, King Richard is recording of having used hives of bees as a catapult-launched bombs against the Saracens during the Third Crusade in the 12th century. Naturally, I wanted to find out more about this, so I Google it and I find a webpage that's literally dedicated to bee warfare in ancient history. Guys, there is tons! It's a complete rabbit hole. I've pretty much shown it to everyone I know, and it was like news on par with royal weddings or whatever big stuff there is. Anyways, amongst all the centuries of bee warfare there's been, no joke, during the Crusades there was only one documented case, written in a poem, that King Richard had 13 ships laid with hives of bees, which he later used to defeat Muslim forces during the siege of Acre, a city that's now modern Israel. Apparently, he deployed those many hives and their buzzing occupants to such a great effect that the Saracens holding the city retreated, aka they loaded the B words, pun intended, into an effing catapult and rained down honey-laden horror and death. Don't want to sign a peace treaty? Bees. Want a battle? How about bees instead? You got a king, we got a queen, bee. That one was Taylor. Sure, there's a good chance that this is all BS history. It's worth noting that the poem was written about 2 centuries after the events described supposedly happened, but as I said, there are thousands of cases where bees were used as weapons in battle all over the world and through history, and more than once in Jerusalem. So I'm Team Bee on this one. All the Bee movie jokes. Alright, thank you so much for tuning in and I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more from us, and until next time, comment down below what you'd like to hear more about on the channel.